Salam alaikum. My name is Bruno della Chiesa. In spite of the Italian name, I'm a bit French, a bit German. I live in America. I teach there. I have something Mexican in my blood. I'm from all over, and so are we, all of us. Welcome to this debate, Education and Cultures, Balancing Global and Local. Suzanne, could you please be so kind and tell us who you are and what you are actually doing here?
Thank you, Bruno. Hello, everyone. I work at a small liberal arts college in New York State. It's called Bard College. And I'm here, I think, because we were inspired by the fall of the Berlin Wall to get involved with education in Eastern Europe and to think more deeply about democratization and education. We invited a number of students from Eastern Europe, and what we learned from them was that they were incredibly interested in education, and specifically in liberal education. So out of that grew a number of partnerships, partnerships in Russia, in South Africa, in Kyrgyzstan, in Palestine, and that's where we are right now with maybe Burma on the horizon.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Welcome on board. Mamadou, could you please be so kind and tell us who you are?
Okay, my name is Mamadou Diouf. I'm originally from Senegal, but I have been living in the US since 1999. I teach African Studies and History at Columbia University in New York, and I'm also the director of the Institute of African Studies. And because I have been in at least 3 education traditions, the African, the French, and now I'm teaching in the American, it's probably why I was invited to participate in this discussion.
That's exactly what I had understood. Welcome on board, Mamadou. Frank, you're from Germany, but you're also living in a sort of virtual universe, am I right?
Yes. So my name is Frank Schulenburg, and I'm from Germany, where I grew up and studied. I lived for quite a while in France, and then in 2008, I moved to the United States when the Wikimedia Foundation asked me to work for them. So the Wikimedia Foundation is, and that's, I guess, why I'm here. The Wikimedia Foundation is a very global organization, operates Wikipedia, the online encyclopedia, in more than 280 languages.
Thank you very much, and welcome on board. So, this is the way we're going to operate. The debate will have 3 parts. During each part, you can ask your question via Twitter or via the mobile app, and we'll take some questions at the end of each part. And there is a surprise at the very end of the debate, as you will see. First of all, we would like to sort of set the stage by tackling the philosophical issues that are behind what we are going to talk about. We are supposed to learn in a globalizing world and for a globalizing world. This triggers quite a lot of philosophical issues. Suzanne, please, what do you think about that?
I think what we're talking about here is the nature of the relationships between partners. And when we at Bard, luckily we didn't have much in the way of international programs, so we got to start fresh. And we thought, how should we think about these relationships? And we came up with a pair of concepts that our partnerships should be based on mutuality and equality with our partners. It takes the specific form of dual degree programs. We give 2 degrees in each of our partnership programs. The thing about mutuality and equality is that it's a bit utopian in this world. As we know, most of the situations and societies in which we live are not built on that principle, so you're working against the tide in a way. At the same time, we think it's realistic because actually each of us comes from somewhere, and we have our own experience, our own culture, our own way of looking at the world. And in fact, we need the knowledge of all of those places if we're going to make our joint ventures work. So I wanted to propose in this context a new slogan, if you will, a new way of thinking about it. You all have heard the phrase, think globally and act locally. I would maintain that everybody has a particular position and that the way of thinking globally that we have seen so far is only one local way of thinking about the future of the world. So I want to propose a new slogan, and that would be, think locally and act globally, remembering that in every exchange or partnership, at least 2 localities are involved.
Thank you very much. But come again, are you saying that ethnocentrism is universal and that we should beware of that?
Yes, I guess so. Although it's not the only force.
No, of course not. But when you're talking about the two localities, that's what you have in mind, right?
Yes.
Thank you very much for this aspect of philosophy related to the debate. Philosophy is one thing, but of course, as soon as we talk about culture, history plays a key role. And we have an historian with us, Mamadou, from an African perspective and from the perspective of an historian. What do you think about the topic that we are discussing today?
I think that for a historian, in particular, for someone who's trying to understand the African trajectory and ways in which African cultures has been understood, the two notions, universalism and ethnocentrism, could be translated as something which has been claimed by Europeans. What has happened, in particular from the 18th to the 19th century, is Europeans deciding that the universal was limited to their own experience, and they had to export it. As a result, they decided to assign themselves a mission, which is the mission to civilized. As a result, they decided that only one human civilization existed, and such a civilization was European. So we cannot talk about the global, the universal, or ethnocentrism without missing the key element, which is hierarchy, that it's based on an evolutionary understanding of cultures. You have cultures which are civilized and cultures which are primitive. And Africa has played a key role in being actually the epitome of primitivism. So this discussion is important precisely because when Africans became independent, the first thing they did was to unpack the notion of universalism and make it multiple universalism.
Things have changed a lot since decolonization happened, in your perspective. Do you think that is the case?
Yes.
I mean, the hierarchy has changed?
Yes, for two reasons. The first reason, which is very early actually, for Africans, for Arabs, for Asian, the idea was in the very beginning of the 20th century that they have a culture. And their culture was different from the universal culture. They were able to stand up scientifically, philosophically, but also as human beings against the Europeans. And what they perceived as the oppressions of Europeans, as the negation of their culture. So what has happened since World War II is a kind of shift which allows an opening of the understanding not only of culture, but the understanding of human being. And the very fact that, you know, European culture began having a genealogy which showed the role of the Arabs has played in the production of what will be called European rationality, but also the role African art played in the early 20th century in one of the most biggest aesthetic revolution, which is Cubism with Picasso.
Yeah, and Averroes was there before Descartes or Voltaire, actually. Well, thank you very much for this, Mamadou, for reminding us of this, and we need to hear more of that. Frank, from your Wikipedia world perspective, what does this mean? I mean, what Mamadou and Suzanne have just said is quite important, and I suspect that, well, in a world like Wikipedia, you have to take that into account.
Well, first of all, the world of Wikipedia is a very global world. As I said, we have Wikipedia in 280 different language versions. And actually, if you look at those language versions, you will see that some of them are really big and well developed, like the English Wikipedia. You will find almost everything on there. But when it comes to other languages like Arabic, the Arabic Wikipedia is very small. Now, our vision as the Wikimedia Foundation and as a movement of hundreds of thousands of volunteers is to create a world where every single person on the planet has access to the sum of all knowledge. And having access to the sum of all knowledge means that we also need to have a good Wikipedia version in Arabic or in German or in other languages, so not only in English. So I think that in this more and more globalized world, diversity is a key value.
Diversity and also commonalities, maybe? Echoing what Mamadou just said, we are all different, but we share a lot in common.
Sure, of course, and like if you are, like you, for example, being fluent in several different languages, what you can do is you can switch between languages, and then you have the bigger picture, and then you can see like what does a Wikipedia article in your own language look like, and in the other languages that you possibly speak. And I find that very fascinating. It's something that I'm doing all the time.
That's great, actually. Thank you very much for this. Mamadou, do you think that a tool like Wikipedia could actually be useful in order to decolonize the African education system?
Absolutely, for a much global reason is the very fact that what the internet has introduced for all of us to use is the fact that you post yourself in the internet. You have the right and the power to do it, which was not the case before the internet, that the operation were controlled and commanded from somewhere else in the West. That the way in which Africans were represented in books were based on an idea of anthropology, which was the science of the West about the non-West people. Today, with the internet, you can portray yourself. It's no longer, you don't have a mediation. And Wikipedia opened and has been opening a space for people to engage each other. That I can delete your view about me and put my own view and open something which is different. And it's where languages are important, because every language carries a kind of culture. And by being bilingual, you are able to open a conversation which is no longer dominated by one of a partner, which has been the case since colonialism with colonial European languages, and which is shifting today because of STM, because STM is the language of global languages.
Can you please tell us what you understand by STM? What is
No, it's the idea with globalization. As I was saying, if you look at the history of the non-West, South Asia, Africa, part of Asia, the Middle East, people has been very keen in the 60s and 70s to be present in the world. You know, the first publishing house created by Europeans in France just after the war in 1945 bears the name of Présence Africaine. The idea being Africans are now responsible of their image. They are going to showcase themselves in the stage of the world. Since the 80s, the idea is difference is no longer important. You don't need to show that you are an Arab or an African. Science is science. The world is open for competition, and you are competitive only if you know science, if you know technology. The language of globalization is English. The economic language of globalization is neoliberalism. And everybody is equal. So you better learn English, which is happening in many countries, actually. You better learn English, forget your language, if you want to be competitive. So today, STM, Science, Technology, Management, is the language, or it's the so-called language of our world. But what it is creating is destroying diversity, is endangering languages, is endangering cultures, and it's opening a world of uniformity, which is, I guess, negative for the whole of humanity.
It is not only negative, it's actually frightening. Actually, with this, we've moved already to the second topic, but no problem, you will have the opportunity to ask your questions on this as well. Now, Suzanne, you're the only native speaker of what is today the world's lingua franca on this stage. So, what are we talking about? English, as Mamadou suggests, or a sort of globish that is actually not really English, but something people more or less try to speak when they travel, where they try to do business and stuff like that. What do you think as an English native speaker and someone who is very sensitive to language as a translator as well?
Yeah, I wanted to say, luckily, I'm also a German speaker, although that was hard-earned. One of the things that I hear in talking to people about translation, and about education, both of which are things in which I'm involved, is that the globalization of English, as you say, globish, or however you want to talk about it, endangers not only other languages, but also, in a way, English, because we adopt a standard of English then which we're not able to perhaps express our most sophisticated ideas. So I would say that we need not only to focus on the individual languages and developing them, and perhaps shifting the balance of power from only English or mostly English, a situation in which we have to really fight against the trend. I think, as in this case of Wikipedia, we have a lot of energy coming from other languages who desire that recognition and need to be heard, but it's not yet, perhaps, the dominant trend. So I would say, yes, let's work on English, and let's work on including other languages, but also trying to maintain a very high level, which means a literary and a poetic level, as well as a science and a business level.
Well, since we talk about that, I mean, Mamadou mentioned it as well. There is competition in this world, and the competition begins on the labor market. When I graduated from the university and I looked for a job, I was able to say, look, I speak English. And the potential employers in front of me during job interviews would say, wow, that's great. Today, my children, if they say that they speak English, the potential employer will say, yes, of course, and what else? The situation has changed from a world where speaking English was an advantage to a situation where not speaking English is a disadvantage. What do you think about that?
Well, in New York City, if you want a job today, you might as well speak Spanish or Chinese.
Or both.
Or Arabic.
Oh. And if you get Arabic, you can maybe work in Langley as well. Sorry, I couldn't miss this one. It was not rehearsed. Now, the question around this, as far as I'm concerned, I'm absolutely convinced that you cannot really get to know a culture without at least mastering the language to some extent. Frank, you are German originally, and Suzanne, you said you speak German. The arguably greatest German author, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, once said, "Those who don't speak other languages know nothing of their own." What do you think about that? Actually, he didn't publish that when he was alive, because I think he realized that it was extremely dangerous to say things like that. So it was only published posthumously.
So I think that's very true. And if you look at language, I think that learning a language is much more than just learning how to communicate in that language. It's, you learn a lot about the culture. And let me tell you a little bit about how I learned French. Actually, it was back in the early 1980s. And the first sentence that I learned was, "Monsieur le Roc fume sa pipe." And I think even in the early 1980s, there was not a single Monsieur le Roc in France who smoked a pipe. so what I want to say is that over the years, and I know that by talking to my daughters, over the years, learning a language changed a lot, and today it's much more in school. You learn much more than just the skills to communicate. You learn a lot about the culture of that specific country as well. Now, the second aspect is reflecting back. And that's something that I've gone through since I moved to the United States in 2008. And I can tell you, like, looking at Germany through the lens of someone who's not living in Germany can be sometimes funny. And for me, this is a very interesting aspect, because reflecting back on your own culture, living in a different country, and learning that language is what you need to do in order to move to another country, is something that is fascinating and that enriches your own life. And I think that's very true.
Well, it's expansion of our own being, as Dewey would have put it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you would advocate actually a more daring policy of language learning and teaching?
I think that language learning and you know, now when I look at the United States education system, in Germany, learning a language is super important, and I feel like, and Susan, tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like learning languages in the United States has not the same value as in European countries, and I feel like languages should have should play a bigger role in school.
Maybe after this election, Spanish will play a bigger role. The United States. No, I mean, you're right. In the United States, you know, this is one of the great disadvantages of being a superpower. You might think you know it all. And, you know, the exposure of Americans, including American congressmen, to foreign cultures is lamentably quite poor, which is one of the reasons we need international education, international partnerships, so that our own young people in the United States can learn to listen and to know something about the rest of the world. We do not have enough language learning. It should come much earlier in young people's lives, and there should be more of it. I wanted to just throw in one other comment, which is at Bard College, there is only one program which requires you to learn a second language in order to graduate in that program, and that's writing. Because by learning another language, you learn so much about your own.
Oh, this is great stuff. Thank you very much, Suzanne. But precisely, we have a few questions coming from the audience here, and I would like to share this with you. I guess the first one is specifically for you, Mamadou. I'm not sure, but I think it is for you. So you will take it. Whether you want it or not, you will take it. Having access to all knowledge, that's more or less what Frank was saying. How does that enrich local culture and power it to go global, in your view?
I think basically what happened in particular with Wikipedia, but also with the fact that people are circulating more than ever, that the internet offers a space in which people can interact, and people from completely different geographical location. It is possible to acquire knowledge, and it is possible to produce and share knowledge from your own location. And I think it's what has changed, that we are no longer living in corners and being invisible. The fact is, thanks to the internet, thanks to new medias, people are able to showcase what they do and share information. And people are also able to engage from different points of departure. And I think this is what has changed, that today from Dakar, you can engage, you know, people in France or in New York, and languages are more accessible. You know, Senegalese young rappers, they sing that New York and Paris are the suburbs of Dakar. which is showing that ways in which knowledge, sounds, way of dancing are taking different paths.
I love that one. New York and Paris as suburbs of Dakar. I will quote you on this, Mamadou, you can be sure. I have another question, which actually is for me, it has already disappeared from my screen, Aurélie, but I will try to remember. It's about global citizenship and whether globalization creates a globish culture. I am saying, well, immodestly, sorry for that the question is for me because I just published a book about that. Since it is a 500-page book, I won't bother you with this right now, but if you are interested, just send me an email and I will send you a PDF file. It's an OECD book entitled Languages in a Global World, Learning for Better Cultural Understanding. Global citizenship does not exist. Rousseau had seen it before, In order to have a citizen, you have to have a sort of state somewhere, and a state requires boundaries and laws. And there is no such thing as global laws on this planet, as far as I can see. However, it might come. The question of whether it is desirable or not, I leave it to you. The next question I have here is how to motivate learners, children and maybe adults alike, to learn languages, in your view, especially for those who are not particularly motivated. To begin with, the English native speakers who are so happy to have been born with the lingua franca around them that they don't see any sort of necessity to learn languages. What do you think if someone is not motivated to learn a language or several languages? What sort of motivation can you imagine? What can trigger the motivation? Who wants to answer that one? Suzanne?
Well, I think the ideal situation, and maybe we can also use technology for this, is to bring this young person into contact with someone from another place and another language, and they will find ways to communicate. There's a story about the young daughter of someone from Hungary who came to us for a semester bringing his young daughter. And she, after three weeks of being very tired every night, learned English. But after 3 months, the other students were speaking Hungarian.
That's a good one. Mamadou, a view on this? And then Frank?
I think it's in relation to what Frank was saying about Americans and languages. It's, what he said is true at a kind of general level. But one thing which is very interesting, at least for me, who has been trained in France, languages are key in the American higher education system. To give you an example, it's impossible to do a PhD in the Middle East if you don't speak Arabic. In my university, in my department, we have 17 Arab lecturers. We have a huge Arab program, basically for two reasons. The second generation of, Middle Eastern people in the US are forced to learn Arabic by their parents. It is true for young Jews. It's true for young Senegalese. As a result, our department is teaching 4 African languages, and Arabic and French are considered, I consider them as African languages. It shocked the French, but it's true that French is an African language. I can't teach French without using a book written by a French. And we can make claim on languages. And one way to attract people to languages, and Suzanne mentioned it, is through literature. It's through aesthetics. It's through something which is interesting. One of the most boring way of teaching a language is grammar.
Or phonetics, for that matter. Yeah. Now, you said that French is an African language. Since you told us that Paris was a suburb of Dakar, I think we knew that already. But yeah, and you are right. And you are right, actually. Do you think Wolof is a European language?
I think in the suburb of Paris, yes. but it's being mixed with other languages, which is also the kind of linguistic creativity of second generation African or second generation North African in French is quite fascinating also. This is also something important we need to pay attention to.
Absolutely. Shukran. The other day I was waiting for my daughter at the French Paris airport, Roissy, and a bunch of young guys were waiting for the plane as well. They were speaking a language I had never heard before. It was a fabulous mix of French and Arabic. In order to understand them, you had to understand very well French and Arabic, but there were regularities. The plane was late, I could listen to them. And it was absolutely fascinating, just like the Spanglish you observe in the US, for instance. Do you have something like that in Germany with German and Turkish, for instance?
Yeah, we have that certainly. But I want to get back to the motivation, because like I just experienced that in my own life. We sent one of my daughters. We sent her to Spain, and my wife told her, well, if you go to Spain, there is this competitive advantage. If you live in California and you speak Spanish, there's clearly an advantage for you. But now, when she came back after half a year, what kind of triggered or what changed her most was that experience, and we already touched that topic, but I think it's important because I find that fascinating that even like an 18-year-old girl can experience that, was that experience that while she was in Spain, she learned more about the United States, her own views, her own culture, than I guess she learned about Spanish culture. So this reflecting back was something that was very strong when she came back, and that was the first thing that she told us.
This reminds me of something that happened to me 25 years ago in Egypt. An Egyptian friend of mine was giving a talk in Alexandria in front of 200 of his compatriots, and I was probably the only non-Egyptian in the room. And suddenly he stops and says, "Do you want to know what Egypt is?" And everybody was like, "What is he babbling about? We are Egyptians." And then he went, "If you want to know what Egypt is, go to Europe, go to America, go to Australia, go anywhere you want for a year or two. When you'll come back, you will know what Egypt is, because a fish doesn't know what water is." And then I suddenly realized that he was also talking for me, because I was actually living in Egypt. I don't pretend that I understood anything of Egypt, but I understood what being Western actually means. I did not know that before. Same thing. Now, before we continue with the questions here and the third part of our debate.
My name is Yara Derwish. I'm actually a wise learner. I'm a journalism junior at Northwestern University. So my question is that here in Qatar, like the implementation of international educational systems in the high schools and early education systems, we find that there is a loss of language, and that there are these graduates from schools that don't have a first language. They're expected to speak English in school, so they don't speak English as proficient as native speakers, and they don't speak Arabic up to par. So how do we strengthen our local language while maintaining international standards?
It's an excellent question indeed. Thank you very much. Who wants to take it? Suzanne, thank you very much for volunteering. Shoot.
I think it's critical that the other language be maintained as a part of the curriculum, that students to graduate should have excellence in their own language as well as in the second language or third language or whatever language it is. And to lose sight of that would be really, as you say, a terrific problem. And it means paying attention quite consistently to this. You know, you cannot have only English to the exclusion of, in your case, Arabic or whatever the other language is. It's a loss, as you say.
One thing that is related to this that I hear quite often, especially in some countries, is that, well, before teaching our kids foreign languages, we want them to learn their own language well. Okay, from a neuroscientific point of view, this doesn't make any sense. It is a political stance and nothing else. A child's brain is perfectly able to acquire 2 or even 3 languages at the same time without having any sort of difficulties with the quality of the acquisition at the end of the day. It is completely political, as everything that is related to language or cultures, for that matter. Just one thing. Yes. Yes, Suzanne. Suzanne, Frank, and then you are, yes, I saw you.
If I read the literature correctly, the opposite is true, that children who learn 2 languages early actually learn their own language better.
Well, the scientific evidence for that is not overwhelming yet, but I know you're right. Soon I will be able to show you very beautiful brain pictures in order to sort of prove that, you know. Whenever you show brain pictures, suddenly you can see anything you want. But I totally agree with you, Suzanne. It is absolutely true. Goethe was right. Frank?
Well, I think there is another aspect to that. When we started our education program, so students write Wikipedia articles instead of writing a traditional term paper. And when we started this program in Egypt this year, one of the first things we learned was that we could only do it in certain topic areas, because in the sciences, those topics are only taught at Egyptian universities, are only taught in English. And what I learned is, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've learned is that because English is so dominant, there's even in Arabic, there's not enough words for certain things to describe. So the vocabulary in certain areas is missing. And that's like a trend that I would be interested in. Like, what's the answer to that? How do you solve that problem?
Suzanne. Mamadou first, Suzanne.
Yeah. I think the answer to Frank's question is precisely working and doing exactly the experimentation. Because scientific language is a meta-language. It does not necessarily belong to a specific language. But as long as, you know, the experimentation is not done, you will have to actually fall back into the original language. But take math. It's not English or British, it's Arabic. It began here and it moved there and was changed. It's exactly the same thing you need to do. But the problem today is that we believe that we don't need to do that. I can also take my own experience. I have never been educated in my mother's tongue. The result is it's very difficult for me to read it. I write in English. I read and I write in French. I cannot write in my own language because of the way in which I was educated. So how do you shift that? It's purely institutional. You have to make sure that kids will go to school at least for 3 to 5 years in their own language before shifting to another language. But as you say, it's a political decision more than anything else.
Yeah, definitely, thank you. Mamadou. Suzanne?
As far as the linguistic part is concerned, I think the languages are flexible enough to accommodate these borrowed words. I just want to mention my favorite German word, which is downloaden.
Yes, please. We have 3 questions here, and after we'll move. 1 question, 2 questions, 3 questions. Yes, I see you.
I want to go back to the issue of native English speakers learning other languages. I learned, as a native English speaker, I learned another language in the late 90s, and since that time, I've noticed when I see other people trying to learn a language, it's becoming more and more and more difficult for them. As English becomes more and more universal, the problem that native English speakers face is that for everyone else, the economic advantage of learning English is now even more important. And that means that the effort that they put in is essentially diminished. Right? They have to put a lot of effort in. While on the other hand, the people who they want to communicate with always want to practice English. So I would like to see what the panel thinks about the fact that as we go forward, it becomes more and more difficult, because I think we all agree that learning language is very valuable, but it was becoming more and more and more difficult. And as we have more and more people who are either native English speakers or nearly native English speakers, that just becomes more and more and more challenging.
I see your point at psychological level and at least at individual level. Now, what do you think in terms of economic competitiveness that a world where only English native speakers will be monolingual actually means? Don't you think that at the end of the day it will also mean a lack of economic competitiveness because it will be just so self-centered and so basically limited to one vision of the world that is conveyed by English that, well, the English native speakers simply will lose their edge? It's a question answering your question, but actually I remember at the OECD, the UK representative, when I was working on the book I just mentioned, saying, find something to motivate our kids to learn other languages other than English, meaning, you know, because at the end of the day, we'll end up 10, 20, 30 years from now and we'll be the only monolinguals on this planet. And this is catastrophic.
I think you're right, philosophically. When I say economic, I mean return on investment. For the person who's a native English speaker, the return on investment of learning another language is nowhere near the return on investment it is for someone who's learning English. And so because the return on investment is relatively low, an English speaker may see that learning mathematics or science or economics has a higher return than the other. And that's really the fundamental question of why are people not learning, why are native speakers not learning another language? It's because the return on investment is extreme effort and very moderate return.
Yeah. I see your point. It maybe depends how long English will actually remain the lingua franca. Maybe we should all start to learn Mandarin Chinese as soon as possible. Suzanne?
I think we need to ask a different question, not just how to get the best return on investment, but how to have a good life.
I would like just to, I have 2 comments. One of them, providing a further answer, is Arabic having the sufficient vocabulary and means? It is, but I will put the blame on the Arabs themselves. They haven't put enough efforts throughout these developments and taking advantage. Arabic language was the dominant language like English now for hundreds of years. And it has that wealth, and the alphabetic in Arabic is about 2 more letters more in English. And up to today, a linguistic was telling me the number of vocabulary in Arabic existing is still surpassing English. Maybe another 50 years or 100 years they will be equal. That's for your own surprise. But unfortunately, there is a shortcoming from the Arab side themselves. I think I will, by the same token, I take on the note I would like for the organizers of WISE. We could have included with this wealth of discussion from the panel there, a contributor from the Far East and a contributor even from the Arabic culture here, a speaker, could have provided a further global. That's what kind of global view we need. My worry, this is the first comment. The second comment, my worry about, and I'd like maybe for you to shed light on, what is a true global meaning, the globalization. What we hear about globalization is a globalization of consumerism culture. Multinational companies, money makers all over, they are bombarding us with their ads, targets, information placed to us to just emphasize that consumerism. And unfortunately, this is a trap. There is even some books about the trap of globalization. What I would like to probably, if you shed light on, the true meaning of fruitful globalization. So we will have local versus global, they will go in harmony. The worry of many rational human beings around the world now is not because English or another language is dominating, is this hidden agenda, if you wish, or hidden purpose of the consumerism, who are the driving force of the multinational companies, the money makers around, and who are enslaving us as humans. And we are losing a lot of values. Look at the food we take, look at the way we live, and it's taking us downhill. Go to the medical profession, go to the social side, and you will find exactly where we are heading. So I think we need to focus on a true global values which will bring us all humans together. And you rest assured, all of us here in this hall, that there are so many global values will bring us together. One of them is education, we know, rather than consumerism related. I think that is needed very badly. We would like to replace these noble global values instead of wars, conflicts, misunderstandings, stereotypes, and we do have the means now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this. Yeah. I couldn't agree more, but I suspect my colleagues here have something to add to this. Who wants to react on this? You have nothing to add?
We can also applaud, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you are absolutely right that the type of globalization we are discussing today and engaging with is the result of the expansion, the global expansion of capitalism and its consequences. The problem is that we are living at a moment which is not the first moment of globalization. You had different moments of globalization. We forget that 1,000 years ago, China, which arrived in Africa long before the European, took the decision not to globalize, to stop the opening and expansion of China. We know also a period where you have a very specific globalization, which was a globalization which went with the beginning of capitalism, which Karl Marx said it was a moment of blood and mud, which is the globalization of slavery, etc., etc. The problem is now, how do we change this moment? What are the resources available to us, in particular people who are against, for completely different reasons, for ideological reasons, for political reasons, but even for just natural resources, environmental reasons. And this is precisely where education could play a role. This is precisely where we have all of us to fight in order to preserve all the languages, in order to preserve all the cultures, to keep precisely our human condition being improved from different corners. It's not, unfortunately, the situation in which we are living. How are we going to change it is the key question. Do we have the resources, in particular, the political resources to change it? And who is going to change it, and why is at least one of the key questions we are living today.
Yes, thank you, Mamadou. But is it not precisely, to just again add something to what you said, something for education to do? Is it not something that you mentioned education as a potential alternative to a consumerist doxa? And actually, don't we need education in order to question the consumerist doxa? Is it not the only possibility we have in order to, create a sort of doxa that could be an alternative, which means that it's pretty much subversive, actually, in terms of education. Suzanne, I think that you want to say something, and Frank, you might want to share with us what you think about developing critical skills, which actually are needed within the education system in order to be able to challenge the doxa. Suzanne.
Well, maybe to come back for a moment to something that Mamadou touched on earlier, which is that as we look around the educational world, there are a lot of ideas out there which, if you go to conferences and so forth and you read the newspapers, you could take it for granted that the only thing that matters in education nowadays is the so-called STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and math. These are precisely the skills that the corporations, I think, and the businesses want. Maybe they also want other ones, hopefully. But, we can't focus education solely on wealth creation. We have to think about the other values, the humanistic values, the literary and poetic values that we were talking about earlier. We have to think about what is the purpose of education for our societies, and how do we enable people in different societies to develop a vision of something which is not only about having more of everything.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, I couldn't agree more. if you live in the US, each time you hear a political debate about education, it seems limited to STEM disciplines. I always wondered why, or, well, I'm afraid I know the answer, but maybe there is something to do about this, related to your remark. Frank, how can we promote critical skills? I mean, critical thinking, which is certainly something that we will need in the century to come, and our children even more, in the same sense or in other senses in general. Do you think you can do something about that?
Well, if you look at, let me give you an example. If you look at how people are using Wikipedia, and I'm experiencing that every day when we're talking to students and teachers especially, then the teachers tell us, well, you know how my students are using Wikipedia, it's like they believe everything is true and they use it for copy and paste and so there are some critical thinking skills that are obviously missing. I mean, we all know that there are really good articles on Wikipedia and some articles are not up to the standards. And that's something where I think critical thinking, media literacy, information literacy is a key skill for the 21st century and for the next generation of students to know. And it's not only about Wikipedia, it's about the online world in general, to know what is the information that I can trust, what are good sources of information, how can I distinguish between information that is trustworthy and information that is not so good. That's what I think is a critical skill for students in the 21st century.
Thank you so much. I totally agree. If you have a job free, let me know. I'm interested. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Hilda Adria from Uganda, and I'm going to speak from the African women's perspective, which I would like to bring back into the discussion. First of all, I want to thank Mamadou for that passionate introduction, and I'm going back to that. When you talked about the different forms of hierarchy, the question that the moderator asked was whether after colonialism, hierarchies have more or less reduced. I want to talk, and I hope that all the panelists can have a view on this, about the new forms of patriarchy-based hierarchies that were introduced in the African social cultures. And I'm looking at it because we are talking about globalization, education, and culture. Part of the result of the new forms of patriarchy resulting from colonialism was the devaluation of women's work, women's worth. And actually now we have an education system which sustains that kind of devaluation. And I want to hear from you, how then do we deal with this? Because I think we need also to integrate an analysis into all the forms of hierarchies, all different forms of education, and the impact on different people. I think we've all agreed that the issue of universalism does not work. And so if we talk about particular women, particular men, and in Africa, I think we all know that girls' education in Africa is suffering. One of the reasons it is suffering is because of the devaluation of women's contribution. So a boy is educated because he's going to head the family and help the family, and so on and so forth.
I think you are absolutely right, but in this type of setting and with the time allocated, it's very hard to talk about everything. Is why I use hierarchy in general. But you are absolutely right. I think one of the key challenges today in Africa is the gender imbalance in education, the gender imbalance in treatment, and the very fact that if we don't address it, we will not solve the problems. And this is key for Africa precisely because of the pregnance of a kind of view which equate authenticity, being African, to traditions, particularly to backwards, and I use that, backward tradition, which are submitting the younger people to the older, submitting women to man. And this is a huge problem. But at the same time, living in the US, it's quite fantastic to see that the US is not so different. If you have followed the elections and the discussion about women, their role, including their salary, we also see that this is a question we can tackle at a global level and make it one of the key elements of the agenda, which has a goal to actually address those issues. But as you know, today, because of the crisis in Africa, because of youth unemployment, we believe that what is important is wealth. We are not dealing with the issue of mentality and the issue of ideology, which are key in transforming the situation.
Thank you, Mamadou. Suzanne?
If you think of the things that are considered traditionally women's work, which are food and the raising of children, and perhaps the care of the home, these are things which are increasingly the topics of concern in research, in terms of food, sustainability, and in the larger philosophical question that I mentioned earlier in response to a question is making a good life. You know, young people in the United States now are becoming passionately interested, many in my family, curiously, in agriculture. Now, when were young people in the United States interested in agriculture? I don't know, but they're becoming interested because, you know, the food tastes terrible, often. Someone wrote a whole book about the tomato, you know, what has gone wrong with the tomato. It's a real problem, and the young people are getting it, so maybe there's hope.
Frank, a word on this?
Well,
gender issues?
Well,
in Wikipedia?
Gender bias is a big issue for Wikipedia because, as some of you might know, most of the Wikipedia language versions are written by people who are male, who are well educated from countries like the US or Europe, and who are younger. So if you look at whatever language version you look at online, you will see that those male, young, white people write articles about topics they're interested in. And that's, look at the English Wikipedia, for example, you have an area that is military history. It's very strong. Whereas like literature, arts, it's not so strong. And that works for whatever language version you try. So gender is a topic for Wikipedia as well, and it's something that we have to find a solution for.
Thank you very much. I won't even try to wrap up the session completely, but this is recorded, so you will have the possibility to come back to it. Just 3 things at the very end, if you allow me. The limits of my language are the limits of my world. It's a very beautiful sentence. It's not me. It's Wittgenstein, actually. Another thing, Voltaire, again, I told you I'm a bit French. With this inimitable irony of his, he once wrote in a superb novel I recommend that basically the French are convinced that without the incident of the Tower of Babel, the whole world would have spoken French. Yeah, you laugh because he wrote that 250 years ago, but it's still true. And not only in France, by the way. I have a question here from, I want the exact phrasing, on Twitter. Can we define a meta-culture arising? My answer, yes, we can. This is a debate for the next WISE Summit. Thank you very much, dear colleagues.